Hey everyone, welcome to our talk today. And so we're talking with Scott Sullivan. Scott is the discipleship catalyst for the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. And my name is PJ Dunn, and I'm a discipleship consultant in Southwest Georgia. And we are talking about one of our favorite topics today, Scott. We're talking about disciple making and everything around that. And so I'm just going to dive right in. We're going to go straight into this, and I want to ask you a question. So in your blog that we're gonna post that in the chat here, you mentioned a verse that really caused you to evaluate what you were doing early on in your ministry, and you've been in ministry for a while. So speak to that a little bit more for us.
Yeah, PJ, there's a verse that I've mentioned to you guys before, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, and it just says that, and the things that you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, invest those with faithful men who will teach others. So we call it generational discipleship, and it's Paul to Timothy, to faithful men, to others. And I remember being at a conference 10 or 12 years into my ministry early on in Student Leadership University, Jay Strack, Brent Crow, good friends of mine. They challenged me and said, what are you going to do over the next 20, 30, 40 years of your ministry that's going to really make a difference? So look back at the last 10 and what worked. What are you going to hang your hat on? And man, I was programmed king, and I was programmed to death. I mean, I could lead conferences and banquets and programming like nobody's business. I was director of YEC in Louisiana, ran 6,500 people in each of those. I mean, I just got to looking at it, and it was just a pivotal moment in my ministry where I looked and said, I think that there are some things about programming that have value, but I can't put all the eggs in that basket. It's not making disciples. It was those families and those teenagers in relationships that had poured intimately into and that they had invested that with other people that was really making a difference over that period of time. So I just realized the programs weren't producing long-term fruit, but making disciples happens more in relational environments. And PJ, this was backed up by a recent study from Robbie Gallaty and the Southern Baptist Convention. It was a disciple-making task force, and we'll put that link in the chats as well, where they showed us that we've baptized at the Southern Baptist Convention 7.1 million people in the last 20 years. Gosh, when I read that, I was like, that's incredible. And then he followed it by saying, with zero increase in attendance.
Yeah.
So what that said to me is not everything we are doing is wrong, and not everything we're doing is bad, but our process, what we are doing, can't be considered a success when what we're doing is not making disciples and we're not seeing the fruit of it.
Yeah. And it's such a good point, because when you put it, hindsight's 2020 for a reason. And so when we go back and we look at that statistic, we would think you would grow, if every one of those people reached one person, right? And we can look at that. Also, somebody in the chat that's also done YEC, just go ahead and do a hashtag in there for us on that. So I feel like that just took me back to a memory. My first mosh pit, actually, I think. So that's okay. Next question. In your opinion, what are 5 words, concepts, something that just kind of puts together a successful discipleship making strategy? We talk about this a lot. So what would be 5 takeaways for you?
Yeah, and I'm super excited about this, PJ, because we actually have a sub team off of our discipleship team that's working on a disciple making strategy process where anyone on our team will be able to sit down with a pastor or leader and help them customize a disciple making process for their church. So there are 5 words that we're toying around with right now, and we call it the SMART strategy. And so the first one would be strategic. So when you think about what we do in the church, the only and the best model would be Jesus. Is what he did. Was it strategic? I've been studying through the book of John about the last probably 12 to 15 months. And I was reading through just in the last few days, those going back through like chapters 2 through 6. And I was reading where he renames Peter, and then it says he watched Nathaniel's every move. So when he interacted with him, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was thinking. He brought those things up. He interacted with the Samaritan woman. Right? People don't do that. Why would you say that? Why would you do that? Right? Well, everything he was doing was strategic. The feeding of the 5,000. I was reading it this morning, and it said that he told them to sit down in John 6, I believe in verse 10. I was like, Why not just speak to them? Why did he say sit? Well, they were tired. And
Mm.
he knew that he wanted them to sit because he wanted them to have a single focused vision on what he was saying. So to have their attention, he needed to be able to do. So if his focus was intentional and it was strategic, then what we do should be as well. Second one, the M would be memorable. Simply put, it just means that it needs to be easily learned and understood. We don't only have some complicated process that we've got to go to a book to be able to explain it. You know, our people need to be able to share that with the guy across the street who just moved in. Well, yeah, here's what happens at our church. And you give those 3, 4, 5 nuggets of what it means. The A, I really have 2 words here, PJ, and Matthew Gibbs and Tim Smith and Ray Sullivan and I are really chewing on this. So I'm going to throw out the word attainable. And here's what that means. When we have a strategy, there's a sweet spot that I think it's between a God-sized vision and laziness.
Mm.
Somewhere in there's a sweet spot of where we exist, of trying to accomplish this thing that we know in our strength, we can't do that. This is perfection. And then this other side, we ain't doing nothing, right? So we exist in the tension of the middle. There's another A that I would throw out that I think is equally important, and it would be alignment. Is when you have a strategy, what you're doing is you're telling your church, here's who we are. We're a disciple-making church. And what helps is all of the ministries of your church come underneath the alignment of that strategy. So if it doesn't work, you got to be willing to get rid of that. And you've heard me say this before, PJ, that we can't be married to anything but our spouse. That's just the way it works. And if we are, we're going to cause ourselves and our people a lot of problem. I just finished a blog for Levi for our the regathering podcast that he's doing for Church Strengthening. It was called How to Kill the Sacred Cow Without Catching the Horns. And that's really what this is about. You know, if it doesn't fit the strategy, be willing to let it go.
As long as you're not talking about trunk or treat, I'm with you. Keep going.
Trunk or treat, bring it, baby. So the R would be reproducible. In other words, the strategy's just got to be reproducible between disciple makers and disciple making groups. You know, we've got to not just make it to where they can do it, but we got to teach them the language. It's our responsibility to reproduce the gospel that was given to us. And then the T would be transformational. This is just what a lost world sees in us. And here's what I would say. If the life change is not happening, then your message is muted. You know, you can say all you want to, but if I'm looking at your life and you're cussing me at the baseball field, and then you invite me to come to church and act like everything's perfect, I don't hear anything you're saying, right? There's got to be a transformational part of it.
Yeah. Wow. And so fire emoji right there. Yeah, that definitely is a very memorable phrase to think about, that is what people are going to talk about. That's what they see. And that's the fruit. So, okay. So in my opinion, the church just kind of needs to decide who they are and just be really good at it. Right. Rather than following the latest trend, there's always some book. It always seems like there's simple something or somebody something. I just named a book. Sorry if that offended anybody, but you know, I just want to know in the chat, you're watching this video, you're listening. Do you agree or disagree with that? You know, that we should be trying to follow the latest trend, you know, or should we just decide on who we are? Because that's kind of a big discussion, right? When we go talk with churches, Scott, it comes up a lot. Just give us the answer. And it's like, well, we can't give you the answer because you got to find your answer. Right?
I love it, PJ, because really what you're talking about, I mean, you think about a church can be progressive or contemporary. They can be traditional. You can be that mixed bag in the middle of that. And the churches who don't know who they are, when people come and they're trying to figure out who you are, man, it's just a distorted message. And I think we lose a lot of people. I give a great example. There's a church here in Buford that they've just decided, you know what, we're a traditional church. Now, if you just look at that, you might think, well, a traditional, they're probably kind of stagnant. Listen, they're one of the fastest growing churches in our area because they figured out who they are and they do it very well.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a church at a previous state that I was a part of, and it was like, we're the church that your grandparents go to, and that's what we want to be. And you hear that and you think that's a terrible idea. Why would you want to be that? But they were growing and they were reaching new people and they were growing people and they were seeing senior adults baptized and saved. And so that should give you some glory bumps. All right. So on to the next question. How do we establish an intentional disciple making culture in our ministry? And then, you know, why would we do that?
Yeah, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, PJ, because this is a broadcast we're going to do. This is a specific one that's going to take us 20, 30, 40 minutes. We're going to begin to unpack some of this. But just for right now, I'll mention Brandon Ginden, which I don't really even know how to say Brandon's last name, but he's got a book out, and Disciple Making Culture. And he shares 4 components that he says are necessary to build that biblical disciple making culture. And I thought I would mention them here because they're solid. One of them is a biblical foundation, which, I mean, it's just kind of a no-brainer. If you're going to build a foundation and culture at your church, it needs to be biblical. And particularly what I found, remember, I came from 30 years local church. So I've been in the trenches for 3 decades. When you go to your people and you're trying to make major shifts, if you're trying to share some things with them based on a book you read or based on something you think is a really cool idea, man, that's a hard sell. But if you share with them something that Jesus did, this is how it happened in the early church, that's a totally different conversation. So biblical foundation's huge. Intentional leadership, we talked a little bit about how important it is to be strategic or intentional. The relational environments, it's the best soil to grow disciples. Anybody who's tried to do the programming in short term or just tried to, do things from a stage, you just know it's less intimate, it's less relational. Been doing that. When you get those relational environments, that's when the explosion happens of disciple makers replicating. And then that leads us to the last one he mentions, which is a reproducible process. So there's 2 parts of that. One is your process needs to be reproducible. It needs to have the mechanism to reproduce and to start new groups, into new discipleship groups. And I even think new churches. And I tell you what I'd love to see, PJ, is for people who are watching this broadcast, who have a heart to start these new churches, to go with some of these dying churches that are closing the doors, that already have fabulous facilities, and let's relaunch an incredible gospel impact in these places that are. So, instead of just starting something new from nothing, man, I'd love to see that in some of these churches, help these churches.
There's a lot of advantages to doing that too. And that's something that we can help you with as consultants. If you have this burning in your heart, and you can reach out to one of us and we can say, yeah, there's this church in your area and you can get plugged in, and, let's see revitalization, which Dallas is fantastic at. I've sent a couple of guys over to him already and said, if this is your heart, like, you need to have a conversation with Dallas.
Yeah, it really is. And if you're looking for, and he can point you to other people, it's the Grove Church over in Ackworth is where he is. It's, wasn't doing well. I think they've doubled or tripled in attendance. They're even starting a new campus with another church that was about to close its doors. So they're taking over that. So they're expanding the same way. Good stuff.
Fantastic. So we already established that you don't want to do trunk or treat. So let's talk about what role programs do play in the life of the church. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, here's the deal. When you read my blog and you see the title, you're like, oh, he don't like programs. Listen, I ain't mad at programs. I'm not. I think that we can use programs, but we got to just remember what they're for. And they're not for making necessarily the disciples. You're not going to enrich that disciple making process through programs. It's those relationships. It's the one-on-one or the one-on 2 or 3 people where you're engaging and you're doing life with them until they get to the point where you can launch them and multiply. Well, programs, they can inspire, they can connect, they can gain interest, they can build knowledge. There's really even some programs that you can even do evangelism with. Just quick story, PJ. The girl named Lacey at the church we left, really good friends with my wife. We had a deal on Sunday nights called Christian Life University, right? We had decided we weren't willing to fight that animal and kill Sunday nights. So I just said, listen, if we're going to do it, let's just do it well, right? Let's do it where people want to come. So we went from averaging like 60 people. We'd have 700 or 8 different points at our church, 1,000. Sunday night we'd have 60 or 70, right? Yeah. And when we started this Christian Life University, it went to 350 or 400 people because it was just 30 or 40 different classes people could take. Well, she came for a program. Now, she didn't become a strong disciple of Jesus Christ because of the program, but it was an entry mechanism where she learned, and she's like, oh man, I need to come back to the Lord. She built some relationships with the girls in the class, got engaged, and over about an 18-month period, she was fired up, growing. Her family was coming, her marriage was better, her kids were in a disciple-making process. And then what we found is even now when we left, now Lacey's the vacation Bible school director for the church. from a girl who just came because of a program. So what I'm saying is programs can have some value. I'm not saying kill them all, don't do any programs, but you got to know what they're for.
Yeah, and programs may be the start, not the end, and it's much more comfortable for us as ministers to say this is the end goal, to make this program. And once we've done the program, we check the box. But really, if it's the starting point, man, that's really what that program helps us do, especially in that scenario right there with her.
And
Right?
it comes back to that first question you were talking about, is why should we have an intentional disciple making strategy? Because what's an intentional, it directs the program. It gives focus and vision to the program rather than just this limpless, helpless program that's out there that has no value.
Yeah, alignment. I love it. And so in the chat, for you that are watching, we would love to hear from you on, are relational environments necessary to make world impacting disciple makers, and why? Like, just tell us your opinion on that. How are those necessary? Tell us a little bit more about the why part. Type it out there. One of the things that we do as a team, Scott, is that we react to everybody's comments on here. We go on and we respond. So even if you're typing and you think, man, they're on to the next point, just take a moment and go ahead and type that in there, because we'll get back to you on
Yeah,
that.
and a great example of that, PJ, I don't know if you remember this not, but the conversation we had, and we're like, people are like, yeah, relational environments, yeah, I'm a disciple makers. And then one pastor says, well, I don't care what y'all say. I'm going to preach the gospel from the stage, and I'm going to make disciples as a pastor from the pulpit. And then it became crickets. Well, you know what? We responded to that because I appreciate that guy's perspective. None of us are perfect. We're all still trying to figure this thing out. I do think there's some things that we figured out that were mistakes and that we can do better. But we love to have those conversations in the chat.
Yeah, conversation is key to that. And so, Scott, I really want to hear a little bit more from you. What does the fruit of a healthy church looks like? We're always measuring towards something. It feels like sometimes it can get laborious doing the same thing. Right now, it's high anxiety because everything's different than what we've been doing. Yeah. But just kind of tell us about what that fruit of a healthy church really looks like.
Absolutely. I'll close out our time with this. So I was at First Baptist Church in Houghton, Louisiana, northwest corner. Lead pastor's name is Gavin Spinney, one of my closest friends. And when we got there, church was averaging, I don't remember exactly now, 200 to 250. And within 5 years, it was just, I'm talking about exploded. So we were averaging attendance of high 600s, sometimes 700 people, in the first 5 years. Well, the next 5 years, year 6 through 10, we still brought in 179 people per year for the next 5 years, year 6 through 10, and we didn't grow. 179 per year for the next 5 years, and we're still averaging around 700. Man, we knew there was a problem. We knew it was discipleship, so I shifted into what we call the equipping pastor role. He and I both went back to get our doctoral degrees really for that purpose, to figure out what did we do to stop the bleeding here. So we had fast growth, it stalled. And then what happened out of my doctoral work is I implemented what was called the Erupt strategy. Again, it was a customized disciple making strategy for that particular church. And it was just phenomenal because we added a connection class or a discovery class, a new member class. So we began to brand who we were in that first class. And listen, I was in every one of them. So this wasn't one of those deals we just kind of farmed out to somebody and we were doing it just to get by. I'm not saying I'm the best of the best, but I was one of the best we had. So I was making sure that I was in there engaging with those people. And we ended up going from connecting 26% of new members to 86% of new members. And that held true for the last 8 years that I was there. So what I'm telling in this broadcast, and the reason I'm so passionate about it is because I lived it. Man, I beat my head against the wall. Man, I ate the rocks. It was a struggle the whole way through. But here's some of the fruit that we saw, PJ. Literally, there are people, because it's a military base. So you have people from all over the world. God was bringing the nations to us. There are people who were changing their retirement so they could stay in Houghton because of the church. Well, you just don't hear that very often. I'm talking about people that can go to Germany and they can go to Hawaii and they can go anywhere they want to retire, right? High level of military. And they were choosing to stay in Houghton because of their relational engagement and the intentional process that the church had. Well, generosity increased. You can look at that budget, continue to go. Matter of fact, certainly wouldn't give numbers, but I was talking to them when I went back to Louisiana a couple of weeks back, and they were telling me that they're actually averaging more money budget-wise now than they did last year in the middle of a pandemic. Well, how is that possible? Because of the generosity grows as disciples are being made and as they're multiplied. Community engagement was growing. Church member ownership of ministry. Quick example, when I would go into hospitals, there was this standing joke with all of my life group leaders. And I'd go in and they inevitably be standing around the table, around the bed of the guy who's about to have surgery, and they're praying for him. And I go, man, you stole my prayer, dude. Hold on, wait, But that was the joke, because they didn't need me to be there to pray. They knew that in their life group, if somebody was going to have surgery or something devastating was going on, they knew, and it wasn't always the life group leader.
Yeah.
It could be Joe Blow that was just a member, was going to be praying for them. So, man, evangelism blew up. I told you, about how Lacey came to be in there and lots of other people, but we were baptizing over 100 people every year. And here's the deal. We went from being, gosh, I won't use the name of this group because I don't want to hurt them. I love the group. I love what they're doing in evangelism, but it was a drama ministry, right? Where you walk through room by room, mm-hmm. and then there's a big evangelistic appeal at the end, right? So we were seeing 1,000 people come through, 100 people saved, but we were only seeing 1 or 2 people baptized. Mm. So when we chose to become a disciple-making church, we did away with that, and we started focusing on our evangelism. Still, Gavin from the stage, he's the most incredible front stage evangelistic pastor I've ever been with. But in those life groups, that's where evangelism was happening. Building relationships, sharing Jesus, but then connecting them into a group where they could grow ongoing as a believer and multiply the process. And I'm just telling you, PJ, it works.
Yeah. Well, and it's so contagious when you see it. When you see life changing in another human's eyes and it works, I mean, there's nothing like it, right? That's why we get up. That's why we do this, and we want to be there for churches because we want every pastor to see that. We want every pastor to look out in that congregation and see life change, but also that reproduction part. How do we get more people in and how do we own it? And it's a great example of how, a program had success. But really the long-term success was more sustainable when the people were bought in, when the people's lives were there. And that's what we mean by relational. We're not dogging any one different thing. We know it takes all those things to make a church function. But we really love seeing that life change. And that's what we're about here in Georgia and Georgia Baptist churches. And we get to do it because of cooperative giving and the support of our churches in Georgia. And we always want to be thankful for that as well.
It is, PJ. And as we close out here, I just say a word that I hope that you all that are watching realize the only reason we're able to get on here and do this is because each of us on our team, we tithe to our church, and our churches are giving to the cooperative program. And that cooperative program is the reason that this broadcast is here and that we're able to gather these best practices. And listen, it is the heartbeat of every second of every day of this discipleship team is to help you, not to sell you something, not to tell you what to do, but to just help. So if we can, man, contact us. We'd love to be a part of that. And we do this nearly weekly. Love to see y'all again on another broadcast. So keep joining us. If you're not a member of Georgia Baptist Discipleship Facebook group, listen, join that. Answer a couple of questions. We'll admit you. And I'm telling you, we are putting incredible stuff up every week with some of the best leaders in the state. So y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to viewing and discussing another topic next week.
Bye, y'all.